Happy Friday, folks. Senior editor Mackenzie Taylor here on the Texan's weekly Roundup podcast. This week, the team discusses Austin Mayor Steve Adler's last State of the City address, the former Athens mayor facing prison for sending obscene content to what he believed was a 15-year-old girl, Texas Democrats putting abortion at the center of their campaigns, 23 Texas Republicans' failed petition to knock libertarian candidates off the ballot, the port of Corpus Christi's future as it marks 100 years of service, Governor Greg Abbott rejecting proposals to ban firearms for adults under 21, Texas's plan to spend $85 billion on transportation construction projects, the State Board of Education scrapping its social studies standards drafts, accused MS-13 gang members facing the death sentence, and border agents in the Rio Grande Valley rescuing people from stash houses. As always, if you have questions for our team, DM us on Twitter or email us at editor@thetexan.news. We'd love to answer your questions on a future podcast. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Howdy, folks. Mackenzie Taylor here with Brad, Hayden, Hudson, and Rob. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Brad, I really want to tease something that's coming out in the next few days or the beginning of next week at some point. You just had an interview in office with Luke Warford, the Democrat nominee for Railroad Commission. Talk to us about that. Tease it if you can, and we'll start on the news.
It was interesting. He came in, talked about why he's running the energy industry in general, his philosophy on it, on its direction. I thought it was an interesting chat, and glad he took time to come visit with us. And we'll have Chairman Wayne Christian, whom Luke is running against at some point.
Yeah, probably
next month for his own podcast. But people should be watching the Railroad Commission race. If for no other reason than it's energy, and I tell you to. I say it's important.
Listen to Bradley. It was interesting hearing him talk about his tour across the state, which he did via train, which is hilarious as he's running for a Railroad Commission, and the commission does very little, if nothing, with railroads at all anymore, which is, I thought that was a pretty fun little campaign option for him as he runs for statewide office.
Yep. Yeah. And he's heading into the general, and it seems like he's pretty bullish on his chances, but all candidates are, they kind of have to be if they're going to convince themselves to run a statewide race.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's a huge undertaking.
But we'll see where the chips fall, and it has already been the most fun race to watch this year, and it probably will continue to be.
He's a very energetic candidate and has very interesting answers. So definitely go check it out, folks, once that podcast interview drops. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and jump into the news. Brad, we're going to start with you. The Austin mayor, Steve Adler, delivered his last State of the City address last Thursday after recorded the podcast. What was his parting message?
So in short, his message to those gathered was an assessment on his tenure that it was, quote, disruptive, which he meant as good disruption, disruption of the status quo to that point. Obviously, there are differing opinions on this. But he further said that the city must continue pressing forward on public transportation projects, progressive bailiwicks like abortion facilitation and diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and its marquee reforms of policing and bail policy. He touted all of that as successes that need to be continued in Austin. I don't think the people at the state legislature and the state capitol would agree with that. They've been feuding with the mayor of the capital city for quite a while, but that was his assessment. And now eyes move towards the race to replace him.
How did he address questions about public safety during his address?
So oddly symmetrical, just minutes before his speech, APD officially announced 2 homicides that occurred within the previous 24 hours.
Oof, that's bad timing.
Yeah. Now over 50 on the year. I think as of the time I was writing this, it was exactly on pace with the numbers through August. Now at that point, there were multiple days, like a week probably, between then and the end of the month of August. I don't know if there have been any more, but it at least was on pace with last year's and easily has a shot to outpace it at the end. So that was an interesting development that kind of prefaced his message on public safety. And after the speech, I asked him about the city's public safety, and he said, quote, "I think our city is much safer now than when I first took office. And I say that because the underlying issues that lead to crime are things that we have fundamentally addressed." In that response, he is referring to things like the bail policy, being more lax on who it is you let out of jail before their trial, the sentencing itself when people are convicted of a crime. Also, policies such as injecting more money into housing and things like that, initiatives like that he believes will prevent people from being involved in crime down the road. Once again, a place of serious disagreement between the mayor and many people on this issue, but that was his opinion. That was his assessment. One thing he did admit that the camping situation was handled clumsily by the city, but he backed the intention of the city's policy to eliminate penalties for camping and lying on public property. That was what we saw get so much national attention in 2019.
Yeah.
And has not gone away. Like they reinstate after a citywide vote, they reinstated the bans, but it's not like homelessness is done. You know, it's still a situation plaguing the city. They haven't done an actual count in 2 years, so we really don't know what the population is. It was like 2,500 in 2020 before the pandemic hit when they counted. And the mayor is convinced that they are pretty close to ending homelessness. He flat out said, Austin is poised to be the first city to end homelessness, which is pretty ambitious of a claim. And then you have the people on the opposite side of the issue who, including police, who believe that the actual homeless population is between 10 and 15,000. And that is a remarkable discrepancy between what the mayor is saying and what other people on this issue are saying. Regardless, if you walk around Austin, you will still see homeless people camping and lying in places. Not nearly as many as in 2019, but this is not something that is gone. And I have a hard time believing this will be eliminated anywhere in the near future.
How was the speech received generally?
So those in attendance, primarily made up of his supporters, applauded the speech. In his time as mayor, his chief of staff declared him the most progressive mayor in Texas. That's something that's hard to object to. I think that is pretty accurate. If he's not the most, he's one of the most. And that's something he wears proudly. The crowd also included the top two candidates vying to replace him, former state senator Kirk Watson and state rep Celia Israel. He has not endorsed one of those yet. He said he will endorse by the election.
Interesting.
I don't know which way that's going to go.
Yeah.
But we did see Workers Defense Project which is a group that I've written about before, effectively a labor union for an activist group / labor union for, how would you describe them? Workers that are in like hourly wage jobs, and especially heavily like construction and whatnot. But they endorse Watson, which I was surprised about.
I'm surprised by that too.
I thought Israel being, they're both liberal, right? Both these candidates, but I thought Israel was more progressive, slightly further left than Watson.
Which is where you'd think the Workers' Defense Project would land.
Exactly. Yep. This is the group that gave rise to soon-to-be Congressman Greg Casar, former Austin City Councilman, who out and out described himself as a socialist. So like that's the kind of group that's the priorities that this group has. So I was surprised to see that, but we'll see where the mayor comes in on it. His critics after the speech objected forcefully. Save Austin Now, the group that spawned after the camping prohibition was rescinded, and we saw all those problems. They put out a draft of the speech that Adler should have delivered, full of criticisms of his time as mayor, taking accountability for issues and whatnot. Not the least of which is homelessness. And as I mentioned, that is not going away. It is still incredibly prevalent in the city and on voters' minds.
Very interesting, particularly as Kirk Watson, most recently in elected office, was a state senator, previously mayor of Austin.
Yep.
And the position is term limited in that regard. That's why, Mayor Steve Adler will be leaving office, is, that stipulation placed on the office itself. And Celia Israel, state house rep. Very interesting to watch those two candidates kind of go at it. And I'm very curious to see where the political lines are drawn. And as you said, very very surprising to me that the Workers' Defense Project would come out for Kirk Watson specifically.
It's no secret that Austin is very liberal, right? And so
progressive,
yes,
very progressive.
And so these two candidates reflect that.
And they're both Democrats in the state legislature,
right. But
Watson, you'd think, just based on record in the last 10 years of what he's done in elected office, and Celia Israel in her position might be, Watson would be considered the more moderate candidate. So interesting to watch that development.
At least relatively more moderate, yeah.
Yes. So it'll be interesting to see where the political chips fall as the campaign progresses in Texas's most progressive city. Yeah.
And as they say, the times they are a-changing. So it's... No,
80-year-old Brad has some things to say here.
I guess it's not that surprising that Kirk Watson running for Austin mayor is at least somewhat different than Kirk Watson in the state Senate.
Yeah. You have surprisingly little gray hair for how old you just sounded on that.
It's because all of the gray hair that I've gotten, I've just lost. And so instead of gray hair, it's just balding.
Got it.
So that's the hand I was dealt.
That's a really great picture for our listeners. Yep. Thank you, Bradley. Hayden, we're going to come to you. Tell us about an East Texas politician on his way to federal prison for very gross criminal behavior.
Very gross is right. In a world of people disagreeing, we can all agree that this is a good thing that he is going to prison. The former mayor of Athens, Texas, is facing a decade behind bars after he pleaded guilty to a charge of transferring obscene content to a minor. He was busted in an operation organized by state police and the FBI, in which they posed as a 15-year-old girl on social media, and he had inappropriate conversations with this fictional child over the course of a year, and just disgusting interactions that he had with federal agents undercover, including violent things that he wanted to do to this child. And he pleaded guilty last week in a federal courtroom in Tyler and could be sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and up to a $250,000 fine. There were other individuals who were caught in this operation. He is 64 years old. And he committed these crimes while he was mayor. In fact, he did so as he was running for re-election. And the youngest defendant, I think, that was caught in this sting operation was 23. So a large age range of accused perpetrators. And he's not accused anymore. He has made a judicial confession. So he is off to prison for at least 10 years. But his sentencing will take place after a pre-sentence investigation by the federal government.
What is his history with the city, and did local officials have responses when he was arrested?
Local media reported there that he was first elected in 2017 and re-elected twice. As I just mentioned, one of those times was the month before he was arrested on these charges. When he was arrested, he had arranged to meet this fictional 15-year-old child to sexually assault her. And when he arrived at the undisclosed location, undisclosed to the public, not obviously undisclosed to him, there were police waiting there to take him into custody. And this was just weeks after he was reelected mayor of Athens with 88% of the vote in a low turnout election. When I say low turnout, the article I saw said that there were something like less than 1,000 people voted in this election. So it was a very low turnout election. But city officials expressed dismay, and the city council replaced him with Mayor Toni Clay. She has been in office since he left office, and at the time they put out a statement that said, quote, "We were shocked to learn yesterday of Mr. Montgomery's arrest in Longview. These are very serious allegations, and the city of Athens does not take them lightly. We are committed to the protection and safety of our children," end quote.
There you go. Well, thank you, Hayden, for covering that. Very gruesome beat there. Brad, let's talk about a little bit of a lighter story here. Texas Democrats have found a new political centerpiece of their campaigns. What issue have they chosen?
So the top 3 statewide Democrats, Beto O'Rourke, Mike Collier, and Rochelle Garza, have made abortion the centerpiece of their campaigns, at least for the moment. Each released abortion-focused ads, and O'Rourke's first 2 ads aired of the cycle were hitting Governor Greg Abbott for signing the abortion laws. One explanation for the gamble is illustrated in a poll that I mentioned in the article, put out by Defend Texas Liberty PAC, a PAC run by former state rep Jonathan Stickland. The poll overall showed generic Republican was up on generic Democrat in Texas 59 to 41%, I believe the where it came out. But on this specific issue of abortion and which side of the political aisle these newly registered voters agree with more, those polled sided with Democrats 69% to 16% of Republicans. So that may explain why these Democrats are taking the gamble on this, planting their flag, as it were. And but when you compare it to other issues such as border security, election integrity, gun rights, property taxes, and education, each of those issues, Republicans, or those polled, agreed more with Republicans on those things.
So newly registered voters in Texas tend to agree more with Republicans on those issues, but abortion seems to be the biggest
one
exception.
Sticking point for Republicans on it. Yes, and Texas has had, I think it was 1.1 million people register since 2020. So these are people that have no voting history outside of the 2022 election. So they may have voted in primaries, but they did not vote in the general election. So this is, by focusing on this issue, it's a gamble these Democrats hope pays off. And there hasn't, as we were just discussing with Luke Warford, who's running for statewide position, there hasn't been a Democrat that's won statewide for like 30 years. So that is a tough hill to climb. Based on our Texas Partisan Index ratings, Texas are 54%. And
we're in a midterm.
With
a Democrat in the White House.
Yep, exactly. So they are trying to cling to basically the one appeal they have that seems to be gaining some ground with some voters. But, does that outweigh all the others? We'll see.
Well, I think these voters, and again, this is one poll. We always clarify on the podcast, polls are just polls. They are a potential indication of something and not anything in finality whatsoever. Regardless, it's interesting. And I think the number in this poll was at like 90% of those polled agreed with Republican border security policies, which is an astonishingly high number.
Yeah, I was surprised at how high that was.
And we see Republicans hitting that issue very hard as well, especially at the top of the ticket. So we'll see what happens there. But interesting to watch abortion, an issue that has been largely dealt with by a non-elected body here in the U.S., the Supreme Court, kind of be the issue at large that Democrats are clinging onto in a difficult election year for their party.
Yeah.
So thank you, Bradley, for covering that, and definitely worth a read, folks. Rob, we are going to come to you. Earlier this month, we reported that 23 Texas Republicans were trying to knock their libertarian opponents off the November ballot. Try not to split the votes there. That's kind of their concern. Can you refresh our memory on that story?
Indeed. So Republicans and Democrats are not the only parties running in the November election. On August 8th, 23 Texas Republicans running for election or re-election, as some of them currently hold office and some of them are just candidates. They filed a petition for writ of mandamus with the Supreme Court of Texas to have the 23 libertarian opponents of these Republicans knocked off the ballot. Republicans claim that these libertarians are ineligible because they have not paid the filing fees as are required of convention-based parties like the Libertarians. The Libertarians used to not have to pay, and all convention-based parties that choose their candidates through conventions instead of through primaries, did not have to pay these filing fees until 2019, when a new law made it required that they pay into the state's primary fund, which helps offset the cost of primaries for Republicans and Democrats, which are the two parties that use primaries. The Libertarians say that this is unfair because as a convention-based party, they don't receive money out of the primary fund, so therefore many of them have chosen not to pay the fees.
Has this sort of thing happened before?
Indeed. In the last election cycle in 2020, Republicans tried to knock a number of ineligible, supposedly libertarians off the ballot for same reason, but it failed because the Republicans apparently missed the deadline. There was a deadline to file a petition for writ of mandamus to have this done, and that they did not meet that deadline. So this time, the Republicans claimed the deadline was August 26th. They filed their petition on August 8th. That gives a 3 weeks time for this to get processed. The Libertarian candidates were declared back in April, and so Republicans tried to give them a few months to see if the Libertarian Party of Texas would declare these candidates ineligible before they filed their petition.
What was the Texas Supreme Court's response?
So on August 26th, the case summary came out stating that the court would not be issuing the writ of mandamus to have these libertarians declared ineligible because they claimed that the Republicans had waited too long to have it done. Petitions relating to elections like this require what is called unusual dispatch, meaning basically you have to do it with haste because of the importance of elections. It seems that the court wants to err on the side of not restricting the number of people on the ballot, so they said that they would not be issuing the petition to force the Libertarian Party of Texas to declare these candidates ineligible. So in 2020, the Republicans missed their deadline. In 2022, they were too close to their deadline. So we'll see if maybe in 2024, if the same thing happens, maybe they'll be filing as soon as they can or giving it some kind of time. But it'll be interesting to see if this repeats yet again in the next election cycle.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. Brad, we're coming back to you. The port of Corpus Christi is nearing its 100th birthday and is currently the largest U.S. port. Very interesting that that's in Texas and of all places, Corpus Christi. Give us a preview of your article on that.
The port was authorized in 1922, began operation in 1926, and now leads the nation in tonnage moving through its channel. Its renaissance has largely paralleled the fracking revolution and oil and gas explosion. It also really took off when the crude oil export ban was rescinded by Congress in that deal between Obama, Senate Democrats, and House Republicans. And since then, because of the port's proximity to the Permian Basin, which is the most prolific oil and gas producing region in the country, it's been a natural lifting off point for crude oil and natural gas going to other countries or to other states. And so that is a large reason why it has kind of come into its own, and now it leads the nation. So, but despite that, it's still expanding its operations. I talked to a couple of guys at the port, told me about some of the things they're working on. The main one is the port's undergoing a dredging project to make its channel even wider and deeper to allow more boat traffic. More boat traffic and larger size of the channel allows more goods to be shipped, and therefore more money exchanged in these transactions, which makes it more profitable. I recommend you give the piece a read to see more about what they've got going on down there. I thought it was very interesting to hear and see about. It's not something that people talk about much. Airports get a lot of attention, seaports do not.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bradley. Hayden, let's talk about some news coming out of the governor's office this week. What are some of the features of a transportation plan announced by the governor?
This week in Austin, Texas, the traffic was unbearable on Wednesday. And anyone who drove 15 hours from North Austin to downtown Austin knows how bad it was.
This piece was only written. Hayden specifically requested help from the governor's office. And so he was like, I got to write about this.
I did. Yeah, I speed dialed Governor Abbott, and that's why this was fast tracked through the process. I've got connections that y'all just, don't know about.
We can't write you off, Hayden.
No, the Texas Department of Transportation's commission unanimously passed a plan that is to last over a decade and cost $85 billion in funding and $32 billion in additional maintenance funding for a total of $117 billion. Abbott's office called this an unprecedented level of projected transportation funding. I joked earlier about MOPAC. There were some accidents and some congestion that just created a nightmare backlog of traffic all the way back, I think, almost to Cedar Park here in the Austin area. And Texas keeps a list of the most congested highways, for instance, 35 here in Austin, and then Loop 610 or I-610, which loops around Houston in the DFW area. You've got 635 and all kinds of highways that are just a nightmare to drive on, especially during rush hour. And this plan is intended to alleviate some of that congestion and create more capacity for traffic. But $14 billion of it is focused on rural areas. And there is also an economic development aspect to this plan. There is estimated to be 58,500 jobs to arise from the project. The governor's office also published data from Texas A&M University that indicates that there could be a financial benefit to the state of Texas to the tune of $15.5 billion annually. And that is according to the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. So there are economic benefits that the governor's office expects to arise from this. Of course, these are just projections. But the chairman of TxDOT's commission, J. Bruce Bugg Jr., said that he hopes it will, quote, improve top choke points in our largest metro areas, end quote. So it's possible that there could be some pushback from local officials. For instance, Harris County last year sued, or not last year, but years ago sued the state of Texas for seeking to expand certain portions of I-45. So there could be some pushback from local officials, and the level of funding that is in this plan is the highest ever.
Does TxDOT have any other irons in the fire?
They do. They are currently working on creating a network of electric charging stations after the federal government enacted a law last year that allocates $408 million for that purpose. And there have been some other controversies that have centered on TxDOT. They had to terminate a contract with one of their billing vendors because the vendor had overcharged by millions of dollars some of their customers for toll fees. And everyone knows paying toll fees is annoying enough, but paying toll fees that you didn't accrue, that's just outrageous.
Talk about things we can all agree on.
Right, yeah, speaking of which. But TxDOT has not had a perfect record the past few years, but they are embarking on this very expensive, very monumental project, and they were all on board with it.
Absolutely. Well, Hayden, thank you for covering that, and we'll continue to watch that issue. Bradley, spicy story here. Governor Abbott made a very notable statement this week about gun policy. What did he have to say?
Governor Abbott was asked about proposals to restrict the ability of adults under 21 to purchase or possess firearms. Specifically, people have talked about rifles such as the AR-15. His opponent, Beto O'Rourke, has also included AK-47 in that. Basically, that's a policy. People are calling for a policy change after the Uvalde shooting. And this was the context in which he was asked this question. Abbott came out against the suggestion that this would be something that could be done. He said that it's not the first time he's come out against such proposals. But what I found most interesting about this was the implication it held for a court ruling that we talked about last week. I think we talked about it last week. We at least wrote about it. Texas district judge ruled unconstitutional the state's prohibition against under 21 adults from carrying handguns, citing the history and text of the Second Amendment as evidence that such restrictions cannot be implemented. The reason Abbott's statement is noteworthy here is that the state is the defendant in that case. And so with the ruling going against them, they would have to appeal the decision to challenge the ruling. And I guess it's possible, I'm not sure on all the minutia, but it's possible that a third party can try and intervene and try and preserve that law. But my question right after that was, does the state actually defend this law, or do state Republicans say, all right, that's the ruling, the court has spoken, we're not going to do anything on it?
Yeah.
And it seems like, based on the way Abbott talked, that at least if he has his say, it will be left as is. They will not challenge it. The Texas DPS was the agency that was sued. The Attorney General's office represented them. So they have say in the matter as well. But the governor holds a lot of sway.
Yeah.
And so I think that particular wrinkle to this is most interesting, especially because Abbott has come out against such gun restrictions, whether it's red flag laws or seriously restricting the ability of adults under 21 from purchasing or obtaining firearms. And so I didn't see much new in that, but this definitely. And I don't know how it's going to affect the legislature. Will they repeal this section of constitutional carry that was passed last year that precluded under 21 adults from carrying handguns? I don't know. Will they just kind of let the court ruling speak for itself and hope nothing changes on that end? We'll see. But definitely a notable update on that situation from the state's top executive.
Absolutely. And interesting to watch both Democrats and Republicans on their respective important issues to their party kind of navigate the age of adulthood and what constitutes, the rights that an 18-year-old can exercise versus those at 21, the concerns about 18-year-olds being in high school and therefore access to guns or alcohol being something that could be, infiltrating high schools, and that being a lot of the rhetoric that's thrown around. Interesting to watch.
And some people are, rightfully pointing out that the state a couple of years ago banned e-cigarettes, right, for people under 21. And there's at least some bit of a conflict between those things. Obviously, cigarettes and firearms are not the same thing, but the philosophy there is the difference is clear. So I'm sure that will be thrown in Republicans' face quite a bit as we move forward on this. But yeah.
Very interesting. Bradley, thank you. Hudson, we are coming to you. You wrote an awesome piece about the State Board of Education this week, talking about its social studies program, and the proposed social studies TEKS caught a lot of heat. What led them to take this course of action?
Yeah. So at the State Board of Education meeting on Tuesday, the board members there had initially hoped to move forward with drafts for the new social studies Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, or TEKS, or they were going to revise them. And that was one of the first opportunities for them to see the final drafts of those, to move them towards a first reading and hopefully to pass them and put them in place in Texas public schools by the end of the year. But, there was a lot of backlash there. And the public testimony period, which was the majority of the meeting, lasted well over 7 hours. And there were countless points of contention regarding the controversial social studies TEKS. And so at that point, the board was faced with a difficult decision because of this mountain of opposition. So instead of moving forward with the drafts to have them passed by the end of the year, the board actually voted to throw them out altogether and wait to change them. So they decided at that meeting that they will add some provisions to the TEKS that satisfy the requirements of SB 3, the critical race theory ban. And that involves adding a civic engagement program and clarifying some of the other stuff, but really nothing more than is absolutely needed to model that legislation.
Yeah. So what was controversial about this proposed standard that was being floated?
Yeah. So, it would really take hours to discuss every issue raised. Regarding...
It's like hundreds of pages,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Yes. Like hundreds and hundreds of pages of curriculum. And even parents pointed out that there was much more meat on the TEKS this time around than the last time. Whereas in the last time, there were maybe about 150 total pages of TEKS from the K through 12 social studies curriculum. I think that there was probably over 500 pages of TEKS. And so it was very interesting to see. But there were some major themes of opposition that were raised at the meeting. The first and foremost was the severe lack of Texas and American history within the drafts. So students in Texas had previously engaged in Texas history studies for an entire year in the 4th and 7th grades. And those standalone courses were gone. There was some mention of Texas history, but really nothing more than discussing the Alamo. And even on that topic of the Alamo, there was one really criticized TEK that made students consider the opposing perspectives of the siege of the Alamo, looking at it from Santa Anna's perspective, and that raised a lot of hell with some of the people that came and testified there. But additionally, for most of elementary school, students would focus their time and their studies on world history, not American history. So outside of the Celebrate Freedom Week, where teachers are legally obligated to discuss the founding documents of the United States, American history studies are severely lacking in the K-8 curriculum. So another serious point of contention was the alleged presence of critical race theory in the TEKS. So like we said, SB 3 was proposed to end that concept in Texas public schools. But at the beginning of the meeting, one of the TEKS draft's worker leaders asserted that CRT was not present in any of the standards, but many people disagreed throughout that meeting. Those people pointed to the negative characterizations of law enforcement and the discussion of institutional racism as evidence of the concept within the TEKS. And so finally, testifiers raised serious concerns about the characterization of American history and the lack of emphasis on American exceptionalism. So they asserted that the United States is a special place where we are giving unique levels of freedom and economic ability, and that the TEKS drafts did not reflect this uniqueness to students. And they also claimed that if students were not taught to love their country, they would not grow to be engaged citizens who cared about the success of the nation.
Wow, a lot of controversy going on there. So when will the State Board of Education return to talking about the social studies TEKS?
Yeah, so Tuesday was only a preliminary vote. But all signs point to the motion passing on Friday, which will be the final vote to table the discussion. So if the final vote passes, they will begin discussing the TEKS again in 2025 when they must be revised by Texas law.
There you go. Well, Hudson, thank you for breaking that down. Hours and hours of testimony, and you wrote it all in one succinct article for folks who are interested in the discussions and controversy at large. So thank you for that coverage. Hayden, tell us about a group of accused MS-13 gang members indicted in federal court last week.
Well, there were 10 of them, and most of them were from Houston, according to the Justice Department press release. They were indicted on charges that include murder, attempted murder, racketeering, and murder in aid of racketeering. They are also charged with obstruction of justice and related firearms crimes. It is said to have occurred from about 2015 through the time of the arrests of these people, and the murders were committed between 2015 and 2018. There were 7 victims. One of them was killed or at least one of them was killed, was a police informant. Another one was a child. They were extremely violent. It involved dismemberment with machetes. So extremely violent murders committed by a gang that's been around since the 70s.
Which is characteristic of MS-13 violence, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. I mean, not that there aren't non-violent drug cartels, but
yes,
this cartel is particularly brutal. They use extreme violence to enforce their more or less discipline in their organization. The quote was here in the news release was, quote, leaders in El Salvador and elsewhere allegedly authorized the acts to ensure individual members and cliques followed the customs, rules, and protocols of the larger MS-13 enterprise, end quote. And they, 2 of these people were in El Salvador, but it didn't mention if they had been arrested yet. It just mentioned that they were in El Salvador.
Wow. So talk to us about the ages of the defendants.
They were, the youngest one, surprisingly, was 22. And then there was one, the oldest one was 37, but most of them were 30 or younger. So they said that some of these people were leaders in the cartel. I guess the leadership doesn't necessarily have to be, street gang, not cartel. But I guess the leadership does not necessarily need to be older in a gang like this one, but they are facing capital punishment on the murder charges, and the extensive other charges that they face could send them to prison for decades to life in prison. And they're facing conspiracy under racketeering laws and using firearms illegally in furtherance of the racketeering enterprises. So very violent people are now awaiting trial.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that to our attention so folks kind of understand the severity of what's going on. Let's talk about the border and a little bit different angle than we usually talk about. Border agents often rescue victims of human smuggling. What are some of the recent examples of this?
And you're right about that, because a lot of people think of border agents as just out there arresting people and processing them in detention facilities, and that's not the case. They are often out there as first responders because they are arresting people between ports of entry, and a lot of the time that entails discovering people who are in distress. And recent examples are in Hidalgo County. There were 2 stash houses announced last week that were disrupted, and more than a dozen illegal immigrants were arrested. At one stash house in Mission, the subjects were from Mexico and the Dominican Republic. And then there was another stash house in Hidalgo County that involved 3 people who were in the country illegally. But they also tangentially to that announced a rescue of someone who had tried to get over the border wall with a rope ladder, and when he got on top of the wall, he dropped the ladder and got stuck. So the Border Patrol had to rescue him from being stuck on top of the border wall.
My gosh.
Just a day in the life of some of these border agents who are coming across all kinds of bizarre situations that they have to take care of.
Yeah, absolutely. And controversy has certainly surrounded Border Patrol agents, especially during the Biden administration. So tell us about the results of a recent investigation related specifically to the Del Rio surge.
It's been said before that firefighters will always be more popular than police because police have to make choices that sometimes involve using force, and those can be criticized by politicians and people in the community. And I highlight these rescue efforts because they act as first responders, but President Biden and other high-profile political leaders brought Border Patrol into, they derided Border Patrol after its response to the Del Rio surge. And one of the reasons was a viral video that seemed to show these horseback patrol officers whipping Haitian illegal immigrants with long reins as they were trying to cross the Rio Grande. And it was later discovered, or it was later illuminated that they had not done this, but the Office of Professional Responsibility for CBP still stated that they were criticized for unprofessional conduct in this investigation. And while they did criticize the actions of those particular officers and said that they were revisiting some of their protocols, they highlighted that most of them did the right thing. Most of them were professional and did not and executed their duties the best they could given the situation. And that was the opinion of the agency that released the report. So that's why we highlight these rescue stories. It's not a situation where they're only doing enforcement and they're only deporting people. Often they are down there saving people's lives and rescuing people from being ensnared in these human smuggling operations.
Yeah. Well, Hayden, thank you for bringing that to our attention. And certainly something we'll continue to keep an eye on. So thanks for your border coverage. As always, we made quick work of those news stories, gentlemen. So real fast, I'm going to take the time and highlight 3 stories from our regional reporters that unfortunately can't always join us on the podcast. So real fast, Holly Hansen down in Harris County has a great series of stories about controversy about defunding local law enforcement down there in Harris County. The legislature passed a bill that would essentially punish localities that in any way defund their law enforcement, and it is capped at certain populations, but regardless, that is in effect now. In Harris County, of course, being the largest county in Texas and one of the largest in the U.S., hits that cap very easily. So very interesting to watch the Texas Comptroller and local officials in Harris County kind of go at it, and especially after the passage of this law. Very much worth your attention. Go to the Texan.news to read all about that. Kim Roberts up in North Texas, Tarrant County, wrote a great story, more of a statewide story about Texas companies offering support to employees for birth or adoption costs. We hear a lot about different companies offering support for women seeking abortions, and two Texas companies, one technology company, Rex, and then Buffer Insurance as well, are kind of taking the opposite route. And so very interesting to watch their policies that they're instituting on a company level. So certainly go and kind of read about those options that they're providing their employees. Very interesting story and underreported from Kim. And then Matt Stringer out in West Texas wrote a story that has gained a lot of attention from folks as, we're recording on September 1st, the podcast here today. And that is kind of when a lot of these new hunting and fishing regulations take effect. So those who care about hunting and fishing regulations ahead of this season, make sure to go read that article from Matt. He outlines all the changes, kind of what you'll need to know ahead of the season. Very interesting story, and I learned a lot. I don't know much about this, and Matt does. So thank you, Matt, for reporting on that. Gentlemen, let's get into tweetery. Brad, why don't you start us off?
So something that caught my eye was our friend Vance Ginn over at TPPF, Texas Public Policy Foundation. He's the chief economist there. News that he is leaving. He is going to, among other things, probably spend more time with his family. It sounds like he's going to do some economics analysis on his own outside of the think tank that he's been with for a decade. But Vance has been just A, a wonderful person. B, he's been great helping me understand the budget process and just all the very difficult finance issues. So just want to give him a shout out. Good luck on the next endeavor. And we appreciate your knowledge.
Yeah, all the work he's done on all these budget issues that are so hard to parse through for us is where we have so many things on our plate, and he's so dedicated to that specifically. Something
coming up next session, we may see a very big push to eliminate the maintenance and operations rate for school districts. And one of the proposals is to buy it down with surplus money. 90 cents of every dollar of surplus money goes to buying down those M&O rates into elimination. But Vance has done a lot of work on that specifically. He put out, he's probably not the first person, not the last person, but he was one of the central figures to come up with that plan.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's going to be the one the legislature adopts, but it's just interesting to see, he'll still be around, but if that gets across the finish line, that for him, that's a huge win. And he will no longer be at the the think tank that he was at where he talked about this so much.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Well, yes, good luck to Vance wherever he ends up next.
Yep.
And we might still have some budget questions for you. So don't lose our numbers. Hayden, what did you see on Twitter this week?
Speaking of electric vehicles and traffic, the cruel irony for people in California this week was their energy grid was not doing well. And after this was a tweet from Bill Milligan with Fox News. He said, in anticipation of stress on the power grid due to a heat wave, California's grid operator is asking Californians to avoid charging their electric vehicles and to voluntarily conserve energy just days after the state announced a plan to ban the sale of gas vehicles by 2035. I'm not sure how they're going to manage if they are not able to charge their electric vehicles when the power grid is not, or the power grid is overloaded. I'm sure that there will be plenty of debate about the efficacy of electric vehicles in view of power grid issues, but that did catch my eye, especially given Texas creating this huge transportation project that will involve more lanes and more highway space. It doesn't seem like we're moving away from people driving around in cars being our primary mode of transportation. And anytime we see some of these announcements to ban the sale of gas-powered vehicles or to move away from them, it's always years in the future. I don't know a lot about this topic, but if there are continually problems with people not being able to get around, I doubt that this is something that the public will suffer for very long. So it will, even in liberal California, I wonder how long people will tolerate this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in Texas and California, they're the two biggest states in the U.S. Always comparisons that are drawn between the two of them, with two very different kinds of leadership at the helm of each state. And the more I hear about even some things that are enacted on the local level in California, it just makes sense why so many Texans are just so allergic to hearing that, Californians are moving here. But to Brad's point a little bit earlier about new movers coming to Texas, a lot of them are conservative. Very interesting. So there's a lot of data out there that shows I know we get into the form of data and whether it's plural or singular in this office, and I
wasn't going to bring that up,
but I saw it in your eyes. I saw it in your eyes.
No, I was not reacting to that at all. I just know things will be if I misstep. However, I saw.
There you go.
I saw him jump into position to correct you.
I think he appears very chill right now, but we'll take that. All that to say that there is a lot of data that shows that we specifically are having a lot of folks who like the policies that Texas leadership has, implemented, or just even, led on, that they're moving here because they like what they're seeing. And that's interesting to watch, specifically in elections where it's been closer electorally. It's just interesting. We'll continue to watch and kind of see what the numbers show, but that's what we've seen up to this point.
Well, since Hayden did invoke the magic word for me, power grid.
I know Brad perked up as soon as I mentioned the power grid.
Three times and Brad will appear.
It does draw an interesting dynamic. We have a lot of people advocating that Texas connect to the national grid and saying that would have at least helped prevent what happened in 21. California is connected to the national grid, and for a whole host of reasons, they have issues. Whether it's some of its policy, some of its geography, some of its the fact that they're reliant on energy from outside their own state. And obviously that doesn't fit Texas, but it's a fair point to raise that, California is connected to the national grid and they're still having issues, and they have had issues. They had issues in 2019. There were blackouts, rolling blackouts, and there may be now. We'll see how it develops there, but I think the point I want to drive home is that this is not a black and white issue. There's so much complication to this, and people that act like it is black and white need to just stop.
Well, it was funny even watching you after your interview with Luke Warford today. You and him immediately got into the nerdy talk about energy in the state, and Brad got on his soapbox so quickly about, nuance and the importance of having.
Soapbox? No. Never.
It's true. It's exactly what happened. But regardless, it's interesting. And as people think outside of the state that Texas is a lot more conservative than it is. And there are a lot of very progressive voters in Texas as well. And so the split between, your more traditional, moderate, blue dog Democrats, however you categorize that in your mind, whatever, whatever makes you comfortable in terms of the characterization there, and the progressives is becoming wider and wider. That
we just talked about Austin. And how progressive they are here. And, there's a lot of people in this state. And therefore, that means there's a lot of different views in a lot of different parts of the state. So,
population centers, a lot of complications and nuance, Bradley, in terms of who's voting. Rob, what did you see on Twitter that caught your eye?
So, right before I jump into that, I want to say I did not perk up about the datum debate. As far as there are many grammatical hills I will die on, and I could not care less about this one.
Does anybody say datum?
Nobody says that.
No, I don't think I've ever heard someone
say a datum as in refer. And I understand in science, right? But if you're not in a laboratory, I don't want to hear the word datum coming out of anybody's mouth.
I'm asleep. I'm boring.
Bradley, you have no ground upon which to stand when it comes to what's boring. You have absolutely no ground upon which to stand.
Indeed. So my actual interesting
there you go.
My actual interesting thing is that Battleship Texas has been dry docked in Galveston. It is undergoing repairs. It's very interesting. This is a ship that served in both World War I and World War II. I believe it became the first museum ship, or it might be the only museum. It might be the only surviving museum ship, something like that. But it's a fascinating history of Battleship Texas. And I have a fun personal story, which is that when I was in the Boy Scouts of America, or the Cub Scouts, I can't remember which one, I got to spend a night in Battleship Texas.
Oh.
I got to sleep in
Did
the
you get
cots.
seasick?
I did not get seasick. However, I slept very poorly because I was used to sleeping just in my room, and here I was in a cot that was a little small for me. Even when I was a child, I was still rather large and surrounded by just like rows and rows of snoring people.
How tall are
Good.
you, Rob?
Gives you some
I am
perspective.
6'4", Mackenzie.
6'4".
Yep.
Good grief.
Tell me about it.
Oh, when you're on an airplane, do you go for the aisle or do you go for the window?
So I normally go for the window because usually there's actually a little bit of, it's a bit concave on the window, so I can sort of lean in there and make space for people. Sometimes I have to take the middle seat, and people sort of do that thing on the airplane where they're sitting there and they look up at you and then they look back down. And I'm like, I'm taking this middle seat. You guys can move if you want to make space for yourselves, but I'll make myself nice and comfortable.
Yeah.
You know?
So you're that guy.
What am I supposed to do? I have to take a seat on the airplane. They can move if they want to make some more space for themselves.
Don't get Brad started on.
If you
being
get me
stuck
on the
in middle
side,
seat.
I'll move over as much as possible to give space. But if nobody's willing to move for me, I'm not going to
You are who you
punch
are.
and fold my shoulders up and break them so that I can just be purely. Yeah, that sentence completely petered out.
There you go. I'm not as tall as you, but I feel the height difficulties on airplanes very deeply within my soul. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Deeply within your soul.
Yes. Although I am much less, not that Rob in any way what he said is confrontational, but I will like go out of my way to be as small as possible when I'm not a small person to be not in people's way.
See, that's actually how you lose space on an airplane. What I like to do is if I'm on an airplane on like the aisle seat, I sort of like relax a little and kind of sit up tall, and then people walk by and they're like, oh, I'm not sitting right there, because that's like a big person, right? I sort of stick my gut out a little and people walk by so that way I can keep my space on the airplane.
I have heard of a good remedy for those problems.
What's
Is drinking multiple old fashions before you get on the plane.
I honestly wouldn't really care about space if I had had a couple of old fashions. I could pretty much do anything. The problem is I might actually start like making small talk with people on the airplane. I don't think anybody wants to deal with that.
Yes.
Do you guys like old fashions?
I don't know if I've ever had one in my entire life.
We'll need to make
I don't
you
think
one.
I've had one either.
Here on the next podcast, maybe they'll give me a few old fashions before we get started.
Okay.
They'll take my mic away.
We'll have you guys over to my house. And I'll have Andrew come over and make you guys old fashions. That's one of his things, is he makes really good old fashions.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah, there you go. And Brad's speaking for no particular reason on that issue. And
None whatsoever.
Yeah, okay.
There's no backstory to that
I'm
at
sure.
all.
Hudson, what did you see on Twitter that caught your eye this week?
So I saw a tweet from, it was kind of a thread. It started with Greg Price, and he posted a video from the White House, and it was Fox White House correspondent Peter Doocy asking Press Secretary Jean-Pierre essentially why Novak Djokovic, the famous
Djokovic.
Yeah, some European guy. Why he wasn't able to go to the U.S. Open because he was unvaccinated and essentially fly in a plane, but then people can walk over the border unvaccinated and allow them to go run freely amongst the United States. And Jean-Pierre essentially said, that's not how it works. It's not like someone is walking over. And then continued to talk about how the border is incredibly secure, which is obviously not true with the record numbers of illegal immigrants coming into this country. And it was very interesting because it feels like there is this really big disconnect between the federal government and then what's actually happening at the United States border and the crisis that's going on right now.
Yeah, that disconnect is so ridiculous. Oh my gosh. And a very fair question, I think, posed to the press secretary. Did any of you guys pay attention to the U.S. Open?
Saw Serena Williams won a second round last night.
Yeah, that's all. I just saw clips of it. It was interesting.
I'm more interested in the golf U.S. Open.
Oh,
I'm interested in week 1 of college football.
I was going to close the show with that.
We can definitely close the show with that. We've like literally scattered like 4 different like fun topics throughout our tweetery section, so we're just going to stick with that. Real quick before we get into college football and Serena Williams, I'm going to give a shout out to Holly. My tweetery, my tweet of this week is a Holly Hansen tweet. Go Holly! And she's basically, I'll just read it and then I'll tell you specifically why I'm bringing it up. But Holly says, yesterday Houston's elected comptroller told City Council revenue projection decreased for fiscal year 2023 by 8.1 million due to a 0.71% decrease in population. Interesting to watch these numbers in Harris County kind of come out. But my gripe with this tweet is that the elected comptroller in Harris County is called the comptroller, where on the state level we have the comptroller, and that difference messes with my head every single time. And they're different offices, but it's just ridiculous that these two words are different. And every time Holly writes about this, I almost edit it to comptroller. Like comptroller. It just drives me crazy that
I thought
that's the word
those two
that
were synonymous, and comptroller was just a pretentious way of saying controller.
That might be the case. I don't know
I
that
think of
anybody
an air
really
traffic
knows.
controller.
Yeah. But I don't think that's how you spell it.
Controller?
So I actually know why these are spelled differently.
Oh my gosh.
This is actually a quirk of etymology. In fact, the word...
Did you just Google this?
Yes, I
Is
did.
that why you
this
know?
Derives from
Oh my
the late
gosh.
Latin,
This off the top
this
of your
derives
head.
from the late Latin computus, which in French becomes compte, and in I have no idea if that's how it's pronounced. And then in English, controller. But yeah, in the late 15th century, it was a variant of comptroller by erroneous association with the French compte, meaning calculation, or its source, late Latin computus.
Oh.
So it was
I
English
followed
people
like half that.
who were trying to make themselves sound fancy by talking like they were speaking French.
Get off the stage.
You can make a lot of
I'll
money
be
as
here all
an,
week.
as specifically as an air traffic controller. You're right. It is spelled the same way. I don't know why it looked different, but that's how much this word messes with my brain in this context.
I thought you were going to say that Rob could make a lot of money reading Wikipedia into a microphone.
Unfortunately, I do not think that he could, but an air traffic
It's
controller
basically Joe Rogan's podcast.
salary. Oh my gosh, that's really funny.
Not
Sorry,
really,
Mac.
but-
I interrupted you like twice. What were you saying?
That's okay. I was just saying you could make a lot of money as an air traffic controller, like
Oh.
6 figures. Which,
Can you
I mean, it's
imagine
a
the
very
stress?
important job. Like
Can you
the
imagine the stress of being an air traffic controller, though?
Oof. I
Talk
can't
about
imagine.
needing an old fashioned.
At an airport. Yeah, 100%. Okay. Oh, real fast. College football, Serena Williams. Did anybody care about Serena Williams win? Does anybody follow tennis? Yeah, I don't really care. I think she's incredible, greatest of all time. She's a little bit full of herself for me. Not that she doesn't deserve to be, because she's so good at what she does, like ridiculously good. But some of the like press statements and things just kind of irk me a little bit. That's just kind of my style. Not that I could ever do 0.1% of what she does. She deserves the greatest of all time title, but
Well, I guarantee
It's
you
attitude
she
sometimes.
couldn't mark up my draft as well as you do.
Brad, you've never said anything nicer to me.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to college football then. Brad Hudson.
I am stoked.
What are your games you're looking at this weekend?
Well, unfortunately, the evil empire of Ohio State is as one of the most notable matchups against Notre Dame. So I'll be watching that. The coach of Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, actually he was the former. Well, I think there was in school. Yeah, he was the defensive coordinator at Cincinnati, so that's of interest to me.
Yeah,
But of course, I'm watching Michigan, and then I think is Texas and Alabama. Is that this week or the next
that's
weekend?
next week. I tried to
Okay.
get tickets, but even standing room only was $400.
Oh my gosh!
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Well,
that was
hey,
a week and a half
that'll
ago.
happen when Texas is back. You know.
Mhm.
Oh my
We'll
gosh.
see if they are. Quinn Ewers is starting for the Longhorns, and Steve Sarkisian is already telling people to temper their expectations because they have a very young team. And that's not good to hear as a semi fan of Texas, a T-shirt.
I was going to
fan.
say, who do you root for in Texas
Yeah,
football?
So I'm a
specifically?
Baylor fan. I've had a lot of family members that went to Baylor, and have followed their football team through the highs and the lows.
Sick 'em.
Yeah, Sick 'em Bears. It's actually funny. My Snapchat username is Sick'emBears12 when I was like 12 years old and made that my username. And so it's still that. So I'm a diehard fan, but I think a game that I'm looking at specifically is Oregon versus Georgia.
Ooh.
That's a big name matchup. Georgia's on the heels of their first national title since 1970. and I'm excited to see them in action again. And then, I mean, we
Who
got
are you rooting for in that matchup?
Oregon.
Georgia?
I think so.
Nice.
I think I'll root for Oregon because I think I want to see Alabama go back. I want to see them win It's an unpopular opinion, but
that is a very unpopular.
You want to see Alabama?
Once again, I like winners. I like Nick Saban. I like Tom Brady. I like them all.
Are you a Yankees fan then also?
No, I don't like baseball. I don't care for baseball. Another one game to look at.
Brad is sad.
is we have Cincinnati versus Arkansas, another ranked matchup. We're going to be watching. We got a Cincinnati native here, so
I'm not a native of Cincinnati, but that's okay.
But you're a grad.
You're excused.
Grad.
Yes.
Ohioan.
Yes. I'll be watching UC. I'll be watching Michigan. I'll be watching Ohio State, Notre Dame.
Alrighty.
And yeah, I don't see any other.
There's not really anything else good, but I mean, it's going to be good to watch all these other teams beat up on little people that they spend $1 million to beat up on.
Yeah, it is. You can make a great windfall for getting the crap kicked out of you.
Yes,
it is great it's a great deal for these small teams.
Yeah.
But anyway, any contribution?
My roommate's a Florida Gator.
Oh,
okay.
And she was like, "Okay, I really want to go see a movie this weekend, but it has to get out by 6:00." And I was like, "Why 6:00?" She's like, "Florida Gators." So that's what we'll be doing at 6:00 on Saturday, and it's fun because I mean, Brad knows well. I love watching sports, but I'm not going to be the one to like follow all the details or turn on a game myself unless it's like the Seahawks. Like I'm just kind of I like to be around people who love sports, and I can learn enough to contribute little bits to conversation. But I'm not like a sports fanatic by any stretch of the imagination. My fiance is very much not a sports guy at all, and so when my roommate is like, "Yeah, I want to watch this game," I'm like, "Oh, sign me up." I just want to be around people who like to watch sports. It's so fun for me. So that's kind of where I'm at with this.
How's Washington looking this year?
Oh, gosh. I'll wear my hat all the time and root for them. I also have a jersey. I've got like a Jake Locker jersey from back in the day. But
Jake Locker, that's a trip down memory lane.
That's a trip down memory lane for sure. But I mean, go Huskies. We'll see what happens. It's just usually disappointing to be a Seattle sports fan, at least these days. Like we've had our moments of glory for sure, but
yeah, I don't feel bad for you. You have won championships, so
yes, we have.
In your
Bradley.
lifetime.
Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh my gosh. Oh, so good.
Regardless, the most wonderful time of the year is back and starts Saturday.
Well, folks, we're excited.
Actually started last week, but we don't count those games.
I'm glad, Brad, that you have Hudson now to be able to kind of banter back and forth about this information because, as you know, I'm unable to keep up with you.
Yeah.
We'll make football fans out of all y'all.
Yeah, I like it.
That ain't happening, but okay.
Well, folks, thanks for listening to our news and our banter, and we will catch you next week. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoy our show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want more of our stories, subscribe to The Texan at thetexan.news. Follow us on social media for the latest in Texas politics, and send any questions for our team to our mailbag by DMing us on Twitter or shooting an email to editor@thetexan.news. We are funded entirely by readers and listeners like you, so thank you again for your support. Tune in next week for another episode of our weekly roundup. God bless you, and God bless Texas.